Yeah. Hey. Hello, everyone. Oh, thank you so much for being here. Can y'all all hear me okay? Is that good? All right. Excellent. So, we'll get right into it. So, Fort Negley, I did not know much about Fort Negley, as many people of Middle Tennessee. And then it started showing up in the news everywhere when the mayor of Nashville at the time, Megan Barry, sold it off for condos and development. And of course, people were incensed. I started reading about it because I couldn't believe that it was happening. And when I learned about the history of the site, I came down to a board meeting, to yell at our council for doing something like this. And I had a very concerted argument. I had written it out. I had cited all of the Black scholars who had worked on this fort. And I was going to make a very methodical explanation of why they couldn't possibly sell away our heritage like this. But when I got to the mic, my soul left me and I let him have it. And when I stopped talking, I looked around and everyone was kind of staring at me blankly. No one was blinking. But then I left and I got to meet this gentleman right here, Gary Burke, who many of you might know because he's also very important in the Franklin preservation community. So Gary Burke is a descendant of one of the USCT, one of the Black soldiers who defended Nashville in the Battle of Nashville. And he also sits on the board of many sites here in Franklin as well. This is his life. He really wants to make sure this story is known. And he came up to me after that meeting, along with his friend, who is an Abraham Lincoln impersonator, who you might have seen at some point, named Mr. Boggs. And they both said, hey, your anger could be real productive. Let's get together and talk about this. And we decided to start filming descendants who had something to say about this space, because descendants were the first to defend it, and the first to speak up, and then to continuing speaking up each time the city has neglected this space. If you look up Fort Negley in the television news archive, the reporters call it Fort Neglect. It is a site that really a lot of people in Nashville would have preferred to forget, but a site that also explains who we are together as Tennesseans. So I sat down and did the oral history projects. We learned together. I didn't quite know what I was doing, but the descendants, of course, knew because they'd had their whole lives and their parents' whole lives to think about it. And so together we figured out what it was that we wanted the city to know about the people who belong to this space and the people who chose to not engage with it, right? So after that, they showed me where to begin looking, right? So after I took their stories down, I was able to go into the archives and find all of the stuff. And so I spent several years looking up sources in multiple archives around the city and some private collections too. Some of these things are not available to the public, but they allowed me to go in and take photographs. They allowed me to go in and write down the names and all the biographical information of the people related to the site, and the story began to emerge. So we know that when the Union came and occupied the city of Nashville prior to the Civil War, at the beginning of the Civil War, Nashville was the second most fortified city in the United States, only after Washington, D.C. How could that be? It's because they rounded up most of the enslaved and free Black people that lived in Nashville and forced them to build fortifications to defend the city. After that happened, we had people who were enslaved further afoot who had heard about this, and they ran to help. So they ran through Confederate lines, and there are some grisly first account stories from white soldiers who received these runaways, these self-emancipating people, and put them to work on the forts. And Fort Negley had took it took about almost a year to complete properly. And the city kind of created this circle of fortifications around the Capitol to keep it safe, with Union gunboats sitting in the Cumberland, so the entire city was covered. There was no effective way to attack the city, yet the attempt was still made. Oh, and somehow all of my text disappeared, which is really weird. Why did that happen? But there was text here that was a quote from a local Nashvilleian who was interviewed afterwards. He was formerly enslaved, and he talked about the nature of slave catchers and how the Union soldiers would repel them and defend the people who self-emancipated. And then as they built, of course, they needed more and more laborers because laborers perished. We had 800 people die in the construction of Fort Negley from disease, from exposure, from undernourishment, from overwork, right? And so the Union Army rounded up people and forced them into work, free and Black people. They went into the churches, they pulled them out, force them to do the work, and so we want to make sure that we honor the differences among all of the people who came, right? Many people wanted to do the work because they were happy to be involved in a project that could potentially earn freedom for their descendants. Others did not necessarily want to be there, but they were there and they did do the work, and all of those stories deserve to be heard, right? So, we also have Dr. Morton, who is the chief engineer. He talked about the laborers who came to the site. He said, "To the credit of the colored population, be it said, they worked manfully and cheerfully, with hardly any exception, and yet lay upon the works at night under armed guards, without blankets and eating only army rations. They worked in squad, each gang choosing their own officers." So then we have the Battle of Nashville. Something nobody knows about the Battle of Nashville that drives me nuts is that out of every single Civil War conflict that we've had, the Battle of Nashville has the largest African American involvement, with 13,000 black soldiers and 300 black sailors who helped. This is never really talked about. There are reasons for this. There are black historiographers and historians who have together looked at the Battle of Nashville as they've posited what would happen if you examined the Battle of Nashville as if it were a slave revolt. How does that change our understanding of the Civil War? How does that change our understanding of what happened in Middle Tennessee? It's an incredibly exciting thing to think about, right? So, and I just wanted to show you this one because this is Gary Burke with his certificate about his ancestor, Peter Bailey, who used to work there. He was our first descendant, and he still remains a steadfast person who works with us. He is on the board of the Friends of Fort Negley. With him, we have managed to pull more descendants onto the board, including Miss Janine Blackman, who's going to speak to you shortly. And we will continue to put more descendants on the board because it is a site that they were the first to protect and did not get credit for, and so now they should have more say over how it will look now that the city is putting money into its revitalization. All right, one really important thing that came out of all of this, so many important things came out of this, but as we worked, I met with an archaeologist who you're going to hear from in a moment, who was doing some archaeology on the backside of Fort Negley, and I was like, what? But that's the side facing the city, nothing happened there, right? Thinking like nothing happened there, which is completely ridiculous. Of course something happened on every side of that fort, but it was because general history had taught us that nothing happened there. And when you talked to Parks were like, well, I mean, there was some stuff there, but it was bulldozed, so it's all disturbed, there's no point in looking. But Dr. Wyatt looked, and what he found were intact cultural deposits of a community of people who were descended from those contrabands, those self-emancipating enslaved people, who were descended from the builders of Fort Negley, who were descended from the black soldiers who defended our city. Right after the war, they came down off the top of that hill, and they settled at the foot of that fort. And they became a community, right? And they had a church, the Bass Street Church, which is still in operation today after having moved 3 times due to eminent domain and the building of the highway, right? That church still exists. Every time they moved, it's been a really big loss for them. So the church has shrunken in numbers, but there are still many descendants who are members of that church. There is one man, Mr. Scruggs, who was born at the original location 90 years ago at the foot of Fort Negley, and 90 years later, he is now a deacon at the current Bass Street Church up on Brick Church Pike. So people like Mr. Scruggs hold on to that memory. Yesterday, I interviewed another descendant who was the daughter of the pastor who was the pastor of the first Bass Street Church in the 1950s. She is either 96, 97, 98, 99, or 100 years old. We're not sure because she does not have a birth certificate. Right? So the stories are still out there, but of course the stories only exist as long as the people do and as long as we collect them. So it's really important that we speak to as many people as we can. Now is the crucial time, right? And of course this Bass Street community was not free of some of the same things that plagued the Black community during Reconstruction and after during the Jim Crow era. So we know that because Fort Negley was the tallest point of the city, it was bright white, it was blinding white, it was a beacon, it was something that Black people fled to hide from their enslavers and to build something. We also know it was a place that was very attractive to white supremacists who tried to, again, bring us back to that time. And so the KKK would come to that hill, they would set fires in crosses at the top of that hill, they would do their swearing-in ceremonies in the batteries that the Black people had built. And they tried to undo what had been done there. The veterans fought back. So there was a man named Leander Woods. He was absolutely amazing. He was a veteran of the Civil War. He called up all of his friends, and one day the Ku Klux Klan came with their horses to go up to the top of that hill, and they were not successful because they were met by a barrage of black men who had held on to their arms from the war. And after that, I looked at the newspapers. For 30 years, I did not find any more information about the KKK at Fort Negley. They did not return for 30 years. So, after all of this, I realized that so many more descendants don't have access to what they need to know what their lineage is, or if they are related to the space. So I created the Builders and Defenders database. If you go to buildersanddefenders.org, you can search the database too. You can send people there, you can learn more. We've got a lot of interpretive information there. There's about 19,000 people in this database now, of people who weren't in any other historic record. So it's a wonderful digital space. It will always be free because it was funded with federal dollars. And we want to make sure that we get our stories there. The oral histories are also there because they're posted on the YouTube channel and we put them here. So you can hear from yourself, from people who descended from these populations. We also work with a team of descendants who are our board, and also Black local history experts. And so, and we do this because it really changes the way that we understand history, because almost every single written document we have at this time was written by white people, and it was written by former enslavers, it was written by soldiers, some of whom did not agree with freedom and equality for all. And so when all you have is documents about a people rather than documents that people themselves have written, you have to work with descendants to get the rest of the story. There's just no other way to do it, which is why we started with oral history, and at the end, that will be what is left, the oral history of the descendants. And we started working on a documentary with these descendants. Janine Blackman is the co-producer of that documentary. And she was with me every step of the way. We really, we met everyone, we interviewed everybody, we hired ourselves a filmmaker. We took him through all of the spaces and filmed everything. And we just got accepted to the Kwanzaa Film Festival, which is super exciting, so pumped for that. And so hopefully we'll be able to make more people aware of the importance of Fort Negley, and especially of the very large, very vibrant descendant community that lives there. Right, this is my last word. I think whenever you're doing public history, you have to be so clear what exactly you're trying to do, what exactly it is that you want people to understand. So I don't try to hide what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, right? I think it's really important. So Ty Siegel is a white guy who grew up in the same town as Robert E. Lee, grew up believing all of that lost cause mythology, became a professor at West Point teaching our military. And he wrote a memoir about how that has changed his understanding of what happened here and why white people need to engage more deeply, more thoughtfully about this. So he says that racism is the virus in the American dirt, infecting everything and everyone. To combat racism, we must do more than acknowledge the long history of white supremacy. Policies must change, right? That is something Bonnie is looking at. Policies must change. Like, we can't just allow grave robbers to fill our museums. What is that, right? Yet an understanding of history remains the foundation. The only way to prevent a racist future is to first understand our racist past. And it's systemic, it is not individual, it is not something that people need to feel bad about now, but it is something that requires action now. So I'm going to pass this on to an archaeologist who knows so much more about this space, and who it's just been such a pleasure working with. Dr. Wyatt, please come up.
All right. Thank you for having me here. So, my name is Andrew Wyatt. I'm an archaeologist at Middle Tennessee State University. My training and background is actually archaeology in Mesoamerica. So I worked in Mexico and Guatemala and Belize and Brazil. So I was really, really fascinated by that. And but of course I teach at MTSU and I have an introductory archaeology class. And I was looking for a project to do with my students and where they could actually excavate. So I had, looked around for a little bit, and I heard from a woman named Zeta Law, who's on the Friends of Fort Negley, and she had told me about this area just on the north side of Fort Negley that Angela has already talked about, the Bass Street community. And could someone do archaeology there? She had tried to get archaeologists to work there before, and no one had ever expressed any interest. Again, because, as Angela already said, there was an assumption that it had been bulldozed, it had been destroyed. It was not. There was nothing there. That didn't bother me. I was looking for something for my students to do. So we started excavating there in 2017. And very quickly, I found out, me and the students, that this was something that was much bigger and much more important than we had really anticipated. We worked there for a number of years, and then we got in touch with Angela, and we got in touch with Janine, and we started collaborating more. So Angela already kind of gave a little bit of the background of the site. I was just going to do a little bit more. This is a picture from 1937, and there's Fort Negley. And of course, this is the Bass Street right along there. Okay. This is, so I'm not going to go over the early history. This is the fort not long after it was first constructed. This is a drawing of the Union troops rounding up people, African American people, to work on the site. This is a picture of one of those contraband camps Angela already mentioned about, and there is actually a map with some of the larger contraband camps all over the South. Okay, so yes, as after the war, after emancipation, people remained on the hillside and constructed homes and turned this into their home, turned it into their neighborhood, turned it into one of the first post-emancipation black neighborhoods in Nashville. So this area is very historically significant. This is a picture from 1884, and I don't know exactly where it is, but you can see there's the hill behind it. So this is what these early structures would have looked like. Just very relatively quickly constructed wooden houses, this fence and everything there. This is a picture from, I can't read because it's dark, this is 18-something or other, 1898, I believe, and this is Fort Negley because after the war, they actually disassembled the fort and used it for other construction in the city. In the 1930s, late 1930s, a WPA project rebuilt the fort. So the fort that you go see today is actually not the fort as it looked when it was built in 1862. This is WPA workers who are reconstructing the fort. And again, this is just a close-up of that first picture I showed you of the Bass Street community right here. This is, again, 1937. There's the Bass Street Baptist Church right there. And these are some of the houses that were built along the street. This is we got this picture of just about a year or so ago, and it was really wonderful to find it. This is from 1958. This is the first time we had actually seen the fronts of these houses. So there we are. You can see Fort Negley up there. There is the Bass Street Baptist Church, and there is some more of these houses. We have, as part of what we're doing, we have talked to a number of descendants, people who lived in this community, who grew up in this community, who are able to inform our work and what we're doing by adding to the story. As an archaeologist, I'm used to looking at things, right? And in trying to interpret people's lives from looking at objects. and to actually have people say, hey, this is what we did here. This is where we went to church. Are the things that we used. This is the pathway behind these houses that we would walk along. One of the descendants who lived around here, I believe he lived in one of these houses right here, told us that, many of these houses did not have indoor plumbing. So there was an outhouse. They would go and walk and use the outhouse back behind here to use the bathroom. Okay. So moving ahead, that was 1958. Getting into the 1960s, just like many parts of the United States and many urban areas in the United States, they started to enact what they called urban renewal, which is let's destroy certain neighborhoods and build things. And one of these was right around here where they were wanting to put in the interstate system, right? So this is the mid-1960s, and you can see there's Fort Negley. We saw that picture before with the houses and everything. Well, here now this is where they're going to put Interstate 40, and this is Interstate 65, and you can see they're just wiping out whole neighborhoods by just crossing them out of the pen. And then here's an article, dwelling sought for 700 families, part of the 47 million Edge Hill Urban Renewal Project. Although it's, you can't really read because it's blurry, but it says right here, of the 3,830 families in the area, approximately 2,300 will be displaced before the project is completed. So many people were removed. This is, of course, what it looks like now, so just keep in your mind that neighborhood with all those houses where people lived, completely wiped out by the interstate system that is put in here. And then in the early 1970s, they constructed the Children's Museum of Nashville, which is now the Adventure Science Center that was put right here, and any of the remaining houses were completely wiped away. Leaving, however, this little space right here that was relatively undeveloped. And that is where we have been doing our excavations. All right, now for the sake of time, because I want Ms. Janine Blackman to actually talk to you more, I'm just going to go over some of the rest of this relatively quickly. Here are some of the students excavating at the site. I just have there's an artifact. This is a interesting picture. This is a 1914 Sanborn insurance map that has that shows where all the houses were superimposed over where it is the present day. So ignore the dots, these are all of our excavations, but here's Bass Street right here, there's Fort Negley is over here, there's the Adventure Science Center, and these all are houses, and we saw that in those pictures before, and there is the Bass Street Baptist Church right there. So this is all the places where we've excavated. Again, I'm going to go over this quickly. These are artifacts that we have found, etc. And I wanted to, since my 10 minutes are up, I just wanted to, because we're trying to do just 10 minutes each, because we don't want to be here all day talking about this. So let me just really quickly end by saying that, again, a very important part of our work is talking with descendants, helping, having those descendants help us to interpret what we find, help guide us to where we're excavating. In this picture right here, this is Reverend Darrell Thompson from the Bass Street Baptist Church in the present day, and there's Janine right there. And we are, and these are a couple descendants right here. Angela, can you remember their names?
Yes, Philip Minter and then Bertus Scruggs, other way around. Yeah, Minter.
Okay. Yeah, and there is a reporter from NPR who is actually reporting that. On this particular day, when the students were there, we invited the pastor out. He spoke. He said a prayer. We gave him a brick from the foundation, which I think is still in the church. So again, just to kind of wrap up here, and I can actually just leave this picture up here, Janine, while you talk. That's a good one. Which is again just the how important descendants and other people have been in helping us interpret what we're doing. And now here, Mr. Michael Blackman.
You gotta take a deep breath. That's a lot to take in, I'm sure. You haven't seen a presentation like this before ever in your life, because this hasn't happened before anywhere in the United States. What we're doing is cutting edge. Trust me, as an African American female, if I didn't walk in the room with these two, most of the time I'm not heard. So, I'm Janine Blackman. I'm the CEO of the African American Cultural Alliance. 10 years before I met these folks, Kwame Lillard was the CEO of the African American Cultural Alliance. He was also a freedom rider. He was also a drum major, really good at it. So he did the sit-ins in Nashville. His mural is on the corner of, it's on John Lewis. Like if you're near the Ryman, if you look up, there's John Lewis, but also Kwame. He's the guy with the glasses, he has a beard. And he's the guy that was in the first slide who had the sign up, Save Fort Negley. He was famous for his signs. So he mentored me, and didn't know he was doing that at the time. I'm a shy person. I actually grew up in Nashville, but moved to Williamson County, and I have family here. I didn't even know my family was going to be here today. So this work is embedded in us. And so Kwame grew me, and I didn't know he was doing that, but it was very important that he find someone who would take the baton and move forward, because it is a big job. And believe it or not, I've sometimes been called the angry black woman, just because I'm speaking my truth.
I'm not angrier than her, I promise you.
But my mantra is love and kindness, and that's what I teach to the children who I, over 30-something years as a youth director, and always have been in this work and didn't know I was in this work. So I really want you to understand a few things today. Actually, today is a special day at the fort. Gary Burt is there now, and I sent a representative for me. It's building their way to the light, remembering the black laborers at the fort. So they're having a ceremony there. And that's new too, you guys. They're having a ceremony to honor the folks who built the fort. I think that's amazing that they're doing that today. And so people are having time to come over to plant flags for those who labored there. And it's going to be a great ceremony with drumming and some music and some storytelling. And I love stories. So a little bit about my oral history. My grandmother was Myrtle Braden Beavers, and my grandfather was Jasper Beavers, and they lived in the Bass Street community, and they were working folk. My grandfather went to Tuskegee University. I'm so proud of that. And he was a teacher's aide at Vanderbilt, but he actually taught the students, and he would teach us as well. He loved science. He would always have something up his sleeve, but a quiet man, but really, really smart. My grandmother was a pastry chef, and I got some of her skills. I actually made a pound cake, and everybody loved it. So I learned from her, sitting at her feet, listening to stories that she stirred. My grandmother was very quiet because she was very hurt by a lot of things that happened. And so she was a really sweet person. But they lived in Bass community. She worked in McClellan's, so she was there when the sittings happened. And sometimes she would come home and she was so sad, and I didn't understand it because that's not the grandmother I knew. She would come home and you could tell the weight of the world was on her. But when they came into the house, as little children, we were not privy to all of that. We didn't know half the stuff was going on. We guys were living parallel lives. I would see people in the cars and like, who are those people? But I don't know who they are. But we lived parallel lives. So in the Bass Street community, when people got to their communities, they helped each other. They would have great opportunities at the church to sing songs and hymns. We taught how to stand up straight, how to speak in public, how to dress well, and how to love community. So there's some traditions. Like one of my grandmother's traditions was cooking fish on Fridays.
Yes.
So she would cook fish on Fridays, and back then there was no such thing as filet. Quite didn't understand this fish. You have to be careful, baby. Don't watch the bones. And spaghetti and cornbread.
Mhm.
And on Sundays was the time when families would come together in the Bass Street community until, I don't know if modern day we have time to do these things, but there would be Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
And so we would have Sunday dinner, and they would cook all the traditions like turnip greens, macaroni cheese, chicken, roast. She would mix it up because she was an excellent cook. My other grandmother was Elizabeth Sloss. I never met my great-grandfather, my grandfather, Samuel Sloss, who was a photographer. But she worked for the Jewish Community Center. So sometimes she would take me when she catered jobs. I would go and help her. So her house was on Sigler Street on the corner. It's not there anymore, but that's where she lived. And my grandmother, once they left the Bass Street community, when the highway came through and destroyed where they used to live, they moved to Caldwell Avenue. And in the spot where their house is now, it's a $1.4 million house. And PBS had me to come and talk about that. How do you feel about that? And so both of those homes are gone. My childhood home that I was living in when I was in Nashville is still there because a family person took that one. And then we moved to Nolensville, Tennessee, which is a whole nother story. Won't get into that right now because that will keep you here all day long. So my mother became a nurse at Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt is intertwined. And so now I'm here with Dr. Sutton and Dr. Wyatt. It's just funny how that works. I worked at Vanderbilt for 10 years in news and public affairs, but Vanderbilt's been a big part of our family life. So the community that I grew up in was amazing. There were doctors, lawyers, there were hospitals, and the community was tight-knit, just like Bass Street community that my grandparents are descended of. It was very, very close. And so if we don't do anything else in America, we need to get back to some of those basic principles of community. Because the way we had those meals, you shared those meals, the storytelling, and how many of y'all had to turn that ice cream thing? Do y'all remember that? When my grandmother made that custard, you had to turn the ice cream, and you were a lucky kid to get the ice cream thing afterwards, or the bowl after she finished the cake. But both grandparents were really good at that. So that's a little of my oral history. So you guys know a little bit about me, but there's so much more. But again, I don't want to keep you all day. Oral history is so important. Why is it important to preserve history? On this picture right here, this is actually October the 23rd, 2021. And something great was happening in Franklin at the same time. Do anybody know what happened on October the 23rd, 2021 in Franklin, Tennessee in the square?
USCT statue.
Who said that? In the back, you're right. So I had to make a big decision. I had to make a huge decision, actually, because being a child in Williamson County, I really wanted to see that because I couldn't believe it. Because that wasn't downtown Franklin, I remember. So I was like, okay, what do I do? So I was invited to this event, and I was super excited about this because when I first got to the fort, it was very heavy. Like, have you ever been to a land and you just felt like, wow, this is just dragging me down? But once we started telling the stories and oral history, the land started to heal. It literally started to heal. When I first walked up on the fort, I was like, oh my God, I felt like crying, weeping, weeping, weeping. And now I feel happy. I feel like there's too many people around me, but I still feel happy. So on this day, that's my friend Fatia, and as we said, the reporter, he's always around. He always captures the stories, and we need that too, you guys. We need people in media, people who are in high places to actually help us tell the story. And so he's always around. He said, Jeannie, you feel like saying a few words? Oh, always. I'm always ready. And so the pastor, and I love this guy, Brother Scruggs and Mr. Mentor, and we're all out there talking about the fort. On this day, it was very emotional for us all because we called the names of the people who lived there before. My friend Fatia called the names, and we honored their memory and their time there. And Mr. Mentor said, you know what? My house could still be there. There's nothing on that land. So I'm like, yeah, that's true. But we're going to remember the day, we're going to honor them, and we're going to remember all the good times that we had on that property. So that was a really, really special day. And then I felt like that land was healed as well. And since then, we still continue to find out more and more about those stories that weren't told. Because in my book as a child, They didn't tell these kind of stories about my history. Everything I had to do had to be oral history. And I had to be a person who was brave enough and strong enough to be able to stand and tell the stories, which is not often the case. It's very hard, including my grandmother, who I had to literally drag information out of to find out things and stories like that. I was close to her. My grandfather died in the 70s. I got a little bit of history from him, but for the most part, I'm always asking questions. So how am I doing time? Okay, good. Okay. So on this day, that's how we began. Dr. Wyatt, Dr. Angela, and the students. The students' eyes, it's something about actually seeing the people who live there, holding the object, and you're digging in the dirt as a young person going, why am I doing this? And then it clicked. You could actually see it when the light came on. The light was so bright in their heads, like almost little beams at the top of their head. Because African Americans generally don't go into that profession. We always ask them, what, go be doctors, go be lawyers, those sort of things. But they actually, the light went off. And that was great. And I'm going to wrap up with this. How do we get started with preserving history? By partnering with people like we have today. But also, videotape your elders. They don't like it, but don't get permission. Just even if you sneak, kids are real good today. Get your teenagers, sneak and video their history, because every single time I learn something new. In our families, we save our funeral programs, weddings, graduations. I found my grandmother's stash. All those things is how I found out everything about everything. And so we also go to the graveyard. It's like, again, it's oral. It's not written anywhere. You have to investigate. Or you're fortunate enough to find a Dr. Angela Sutton who don't take no for an answer, and Dr. Wyatt who help you get even more information. And then you have to find who has a prized possession. In every African American family, there's a prized possession in the family. Who can guess what it is? It sits in the living room, it's on a coffee table or a special table. It's really thick and it has things falling out of it.
The Bible.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's the Bible. It's the prized possession. Our cousin has our family Bible, and I really need to talk to her about, could you pass it on to me so I can figure out who I can pass it on? But every chance I get that Bible, it takes hours to go through. I learned that my grandmother was not a sibling of 11 or 12. It was actually much more than that. And then the time they were born, the time they died, who married who, that sort of thing. So that's a prized possession. So if you talk to an elderly person, ask them about the Bible, the family Bible. If they don't remember, the ancestors before them might have written down the things that you would need to know. And again, the graveyard, like Round Hill in Linville, is where we go sometimes. Most importantly, and this is coming from the heart, all of it has, generally, because what am I? Love and kindness. Spend time with your children and your grandchildren, your church, wherever you go. Create gatherings where people can talk about history. It's not a bad idea. You might even have an object in your house that you can communicate around. You can pick up that object and you can hand it. Like my grandmother literally had this bowl I have now. Every time I look at it, it brings happy space, where she would mix those cakes. My grandmother, Elizabeth, I was at the house yesterday taking care of some things from my family home, my parents' home. And my grandmother's hat, Elizabeth, she dressed really nice. And all my family with gloves and a special hat. And so I looked at the hat, and I can tell my granddaughter a story about the hat. When we're making a cake, I'll pull out that bowl, and I can stir that cake just like that with my grandmother and do that with my granddaughter. Her name is Nyla, and I have Kate and me. So, you love and kindness. I see you are too. So let's bake this cake. So you can pull out things and talk to them about it and keep the history going. It's not my history, it's our history. And it's important that we continue to tell the stories. Stories are everything. And also, if you can walk alongside someone who doesn't look like you to help them to get their story told, do that as well. Because like I said, Kwame had tried this for many years before and nothing happened. I sometimes get ridiculed, in all honesty, for walking with Dr. Angela and Dr. Wyatt. But I also have Dr. Williams and I have Dr. Wynn, who are African Americans. I have a whole village. It takes a village. But in order to get this work done, I'm going to take whoever will come with me and hold my hand and help me tell the stories of my ancestors. It's so important work. It is beyond important because my community has disappeared in South Nashville. Gone. Regentrification has taken it all. My organization is trying now to save, I can't say save, but try to influence preservation in North Nashville. And we're not always welcome to have those conversations. But it's time is now. Franklin, we want to get started on that. There's some places here we need to save. So it's important that we save history, we remember history, and understand history is healing. It really does heal everyone. On a brighter note, so I don't leave y'all like it's all bad, but Fort Negley, there's a plan right now to save Fort Negley forever. It's a beautiful plan. If you have a chance, call the master plan, go online, check it out. And we're super excited about that. And then we will continue to be at Bass Street. Richie, one of the contractors who's working on the plan for Fort Negley, made sure that there's going to be for a lifetime education going on there. And so we're super excited about the future. And I'm so happy that you guys give me the opportunity to serve this time with you. And I enjoy this moment of my life. I cannot believe I'm in downtown Franklin talking about history. Any questions for any of us? Yeah.
Some of the most memorable artifacts that you've found over the years on that Fort Negley land, the time frame that they're related to, and who's taking ownership?
That's a lot of questions in one. Now, the first part, what are some of the most memorable artifacts? Okay, I could, it's not any one, there we go. It's not any one individual artifact that I would say is most memorable. It's the accumulation of all the artifacts together, which tell a story. In this case, many of these artifacts tell a story of resilience. One of the things we've noticed is we find lots of ceramics, we find pottery, we find construction materials, and talking about the ceramics, the pottery, we have never found any pieces that are the same. People often would buy like a set of china. You have like a china set or something like that. We don't find that. What we find is people are making do with what they can and getting a plate here, a bowl here, and that's how they are surviving. This is a fork that is actually from a dining car of a train. So someone was on a dining car at a train and said, I'll take this fork.
Can I share about that? That is my favorite artifact.
Okay.
Because everyone's like, why would you like the fork so much? I love this fork because that day that we all came together on the land, there was a little man in a fedora who came back, Dr. Sutton! Dr. Sutton! And he's like running up the hill, and we were just about to tear down and put away our things. And he was like, hey, I'm Carter Newton. I volunteer at the Tennessee Central Railroad. I was looking through some files that we had that a member had returned, because you remember there was that big tornado that ripped the roof right off the Tennessee Central Railroad Museum. So all the documents were in that attic, and a lot of them got ripped away, and a lot of them were saved, though. People ran up there and saved those artifacts. They saved a box of employment records from the 1900s, the early 1900s, up until the 1950s. Those employees were Black employees whose address was Bass Street. And then we find a railroad fork, which kind of ties it all together, right? You have like multiple things. And then we have oral history of people saying how their fathers worked the railroad. And so now you can construct this idea of someone like working at Bass Street, being very proud, they're making just as much as a white worker, which was very rare in Nashville. And they're taking home things as the railroad no longer needs them and passing them out in their community. And then the archaeologist finds evidence of that.
Yeah.
Things like that are so amazing. It's much more amazing if you just hand someone a fork with no context. But like with the story, it's like, what a fork.
Just to answer the rest of your question, I think you said who's going to take ownership. Right now, the artifacts are all or most of them are at MTSU. We are analyzing them and processing them, meaning that we're identifying, who made this fork and et cetera, and we're, coming up with dates and ages as best as we can. Once we finish with this, Fort Negley or the Parks has requested that we give it all back to them. I'm not sure what they're going to do with it. I mean, we have probably close to 10,000 artifacts in many boxes. I've been to Fort Negley. I don't know if they have the room. So, but they have asked for it back. So that's ultimately who's going to have ownership. But right now they're at MTSU. So does that answer all the questions that you had, or did I miss one?
The only one would have been in the middle of that is the time frame for the most part, because most of this then would have been post 1900.
Yeah. We have some very early stuff. This is a little piece of a pencil that a kid would have used to write on a slate, which is probably more 19th century. We also have some old construction materials like square hand-forged nails that are from the 19th century. So we have stuff from the 1800s all the way up into the 1960s is the time frame. So we've got the whole thing.
Janine, how far back does your oral history go?
So, for me, my niece and I have been researching. We have a white family who owned a hospital, and it's in the early 1800s. So we've gotten that far.
Good, I want to talk to you more.
Okay, 1800s, yeah. And we were shocked. Well, we weren't real shocked, but a little shocked. They have native relatives too, I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. Mm-hmm.
We're doing a lot of good things here in Franklin with African American Heritage Society, but we find it difficult to get more young people involved. How do you all get, you all having issues with that as well? Because I know you talked about sharing the stories, but this day and time, it's just not something that's on their radar, and that's a challenge for us.
So the African American Cultural Alliance, we have now as a partner with a younger group of folk to do Juneteenth celebration. And I wish I had a photo of that, but the Juneteenth, if you look it up, is Juneteenth 615. And that's made a difference. So on that day especially, we're intentional about history as well as music, food, trucks, and things like that. Do I have to go through a lot to make that happen? I do, because they're like, wow, this history. But they have to vote at least the first hour of the festival to intertwine history with music and things like that. This past year, this year, June 19th, we were able to do some interpretations on the Hill. So we had actors to come up, and we decided to get some golf carts so we could take people up the hill and do tours and things like that. And Friends of Fort Negley, which the board as well supported, and they did tours. Angela walked how much up the hill to tell the stories, and we told the stories that way. But they did not know about the history, and the biggest thing is how to connect them to the land. And that's literally everything. And give them an assignment.
Well, we have a Young Leaders Network, but it's nothing consistent. My goal and my dream is to have a consistent network of young people who really, really are engaged and intentional and deliberate about wanting to know. And I am guilty as a parent to not share. I never thought about sharing history, my family history with my kids. We're too busy raising your kids, and you have all these challenges of the education and the sports, and I have boys and involved in all of that. I never sit down with them and start sharing. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, even if it's just one simple object. You told the story then. But what I would say is, and I'm trying to figure out how to have time to do this, is to start a drama troupe. And I think that would engage young people. And I would say middle school to high school, and what's always worked for me is to have a younger group and an older group that governs the younger group. And I sort of facilitate what they do. And that way they feel like the ownership of it, and they could come and perform. Kids love performing.
Oh, yeah.
But then they could intertwine some old school and with some new school, some remix, and I think that they would be happy to do that. But I think the problem for African American or all children is how you tie them to the land. Why is this important? That was them, it's not me, but it is you too. So, but when they come out there, they're so happy, they're so proud. You guys should check out the videos for Juneteenth 615. It's amazing. Their eyes are like, even my kids, I'm like, y'all were with me the whole time. But they came out to the event, they're like, yeah, this is neat. And my son drives the cart and he learned the history, he tells the history, so give him something to do.
Get them on TikTok. If we get on TikTok, you know, to get
TikTok
that's how
works.
they love it. It works, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Janine, you mentioned some work you're trying to do in North Nashville and challenges there. What are some of the barriers to the work you're doing in North Nashville?
So the barrier is gentrification, and we really want to try to do some land reparations and some land grants to try to secure a certain part of the city in order for us to preserve what's left. That's the only community left that similarly kind of look like what we grew up with. And so we're concerned that we won't have anything left. And so we're just trying to figure out how to make that happen. Even with the Fort Negley project, it took a lot. It takes a toll.
Yes.
And so with the North Nashville project, I would love for us to be able to, and this, you guys have heard it first, I hadn't really said it out loud, we've been having little meetings with folk, is finding the right combination of people who are ready for the charge. And I feel like this is a vocation for me, it's a charge, it has to happen. There's historic Jefferson Street, which is fine, it's safe, but there's still a perimeter around where the park is now named after Hadley Lillard Park, after Kwame Lillard, that's in danger. There are universities there. My parents went to TSU. There's Fisk University and there's Meharry. But beyond that, it's getting a little sketchy. And that's where my Aunt Callie lived, and her husband was a minister in North Nashville. And they still have their home, but a lot of those homes are gone already. Any suggestions on that, y'all? Just see me after this. You've done an amazing job here in Franklin. It feels like Franklin. It looks like Franklin. You don't know how much that warms your heart to be in a place that looks like it used to. It's very rare. Anything else? You're so quiet over there. Y'all don't have anything?
Well, I was actually just going to show you one thing real quick, which is here is a picture of the Fort Negley master plan. I think this is a little bit older. I think there's been some changes to it, but this is roughly what it's going to be, including down here the Bass Street Plaza, where they're going to have, and not exhibits, but a
Yeah,
display
it's
exhibit. They're going to acknowledge the Bass Street community as part of that base, and they're putting this in here because of the work that we have done. If we hadn't gone there and done the archaeology and done the oral histories and talked about it and been in the news, it would have just been bulldozed
Their
and
plan was
nothing.
for a parking lot.
Yeah, and nothing would
And I was
be.
like, no, sir.
A tree. A tree's There's a bunch of trees.
Yeah.
And so now Janine and I are we're paid consultants with the landscape architects and with the interpretive design team, which is Ralph Applebaum, which are the top design firm in the country. They're actually international as well. So it's been really wonderful to be able to hand them direct quotes from descendants from the video footage that I've taken and just be like, hey, these are the people who belong to this space. Here's what they've said about it. Here's how the archaeology corroborates or doesn't with what they say. Here's some of the historical research we've been able to pull up based on what they told us and where they told us to look, right? So I think if you take anything away from this time with us, please take away the fact that once you begin speaking to the people who are the living legacies of a space, they will tell you where to look. They will tell you what's important. They will tell you where to go. And when I first started, I didn't know anything about that because the knowledge system I come from, which is the American academic higher education knowledge system, that knowledge system does not prize seeking out descendants and listening to them and letting them lead a project. And so really what the descendants said created the research questions that we formulated, and from there taught us where and how to go hunting. They also taught us what things that they would want. They were like, if you're going to go into the archive, can you please pull out this stuff? Look for all the people, look for the churches, look for the community vectors. And that really sort of helped us to reconstruct in a way that I was just never taught in grad school. and that a lot of professors still don't really do it this way, right? And so I think I didn't know where it was going to lead, but you do have to have like a kind of a measure of faith, and that comes from Martin Luther King. You don't got to see the whole staircase, just the first step. And the second you jump on that step, the next step will emerge, and you have to have faith that each step will emerge, but each step has, and we've taken those steps together, and it's been a really cool journey.
Yeah, it's phase 1 and 2, and it's going to be amazing. And all roads lead to freedom for Nashville, to Fort Negley. And they're going to have a Freedom Plaza with a lantern and bright light just to light the path for those who come.